They grew up to the sound of saws and the scent of glue, surrounded by splinters and secondhand nails. No one ever imagined that these twin girls, barefoot, dirt-streaked, their hair tied with scraps of twine, would one day bring an entire town to tears. The man who raised them, Leo, had nothing but a rundown carpentry shed and two calloused hands. He carved a vow into a piece of oak the day their mother died, a promise whispered to the walls of his workshop, soaked in grief and sawdust. 25 years later, that vow would be repaid, not with money, but with tears, gratitude, and something so powerful it left the town utterly silent. The workshop wasn't much, just four wooden walls that creaked with every gust of wind, a roof patched with sheet metal, and the scent of pine sap clinging to every corner like memory. But for Leo, that small carpentry shed was everything. It was his income, shelter, sanctuary, and the only place left standing after grief came knocking. Leo wasn't always alone. Once, he had laughter in his home, warmth, a woman with gentle eyes who hummed as she folded baby clothes and painted butterflies on the nursery wall. But all that was taken from him in a single, brutal moment, when childbirth gave him two daughters and took his wife away. People in town whispered it was bad luck. Twins, they'd mutter, as if it explained everything. Two mouths to feed, two futures to build, and one broken man left behind, drowning in diapers, debt, and the kind of sorrow that couldn't be repaired with nails or glue. But Leo didn't drink. He didn't leave. He didn't abandon. Instead, he built cribs from leftover lumber, toys from firewood scraps, and lullabies from the rhythm of hammer strikes. While other men were off chasing new lives or new wives, Leo stayed in his shed, carving wooden dolls for two tiny girls with matching dimples and eyes just like their mothers. He named them Ellie and Nori. Ellie, the louder one, always climbing, always laughing. Nora, the quieter twin, observant, protective, already carrying the worry her father tried to hide. They slept in a shared bed he built with reclaimed cedar, played with tools too big for their hands, and knew how to sand a smooth board before they knew how to spell their names. Leo worked from dawn to midnight, taking whatever jobs he could, fixing broken chairs, making cheap cabinets, even crafting birdhouses just to scrape together enough for food. Some days, they had porridge. Some days, they had nothing but bread soaked in warm water and honey. The townspeople looked on with half pity, half judgment. "Why doesn't he give them up?" they'd whisper. "He's wasting his life on girls who'll grow up, get married, and leave him." But Leo didn't listen. He had already made a vow. The day his wife died, he had taken her favorite chisel, the one with the oak handle, and carved these words into the underside of his workshop table. "I'll raise them with everything I have, and when I have nothing left, I'll give them love." That table still stood in the workshop, stained with paint, cracked at the edges, but holding steady, like Leo. Years passed, and the twins grew, just as poor, just as inseparable, but always clean, always curious. They never had birthday parties, but they had cake made from mashed bananas and leftover flour. They didn't have new dresses, but wore matching tunics stitched from curtains. And every night, they fell asleep to their father's stories, tales of forest fairies, lost queens, and magic wood that remembered the hands that carved it. Leo never told them how hard it was, how he sometimes cried behind the workshop, how his fingers bled, how his dreams never included raising two girls alone. He simply sanded the splinters, wiped the sweat, and loved them harder. He didn't know if it would ever be enough, but he knew one thing: he would never stop building. It happened the summer they turned 10, the kind of summer where the sun was too hot, the air too dry, and everything felt like it was stretching thin, like the world itself might snap if one more thing went wrong. Leo had taken on too many orders that season. Word had spread to nearby towns about the carpenter with magic hands, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of his work: chairs, shelves, doors with carvings of angels and oak leaves. He barely slept. The girls would wake up some nights and still hear the rasp of a file or the soft tap-tap of a mallet from the workshop. One evening, he was working on a commissioned bed frame, a wedding gift, made of walnut and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. His hands trembled from exhaustion, but he pushed through, refusing to miss another deadline. That was the night Nora screamed. Ellie had climbed one of the workshop's tall shelves to get a jar of screws. She slipped. A splintered edge caught her cheek, and she fell face first onto the concrete floor. Leo ran to them, his chest seizing as he saw the blood, the gash running from Ellie's temple to her jaw, the stunned silence in Nora's wide, horrified eyes. He scooped her up and ran, barefoot, through the dusty road to the nearest clinic, leaving behind the bed frame, the tools, the open door. Ellie would be fine. Stitches, a scar, but something in Leo broke that night. He blamed himself. He had left sharp tools within reach. He had let work blind him. And worst of all, he'd seen fear in his daughter's eyes, not for the injury, but for him, for the look on his face when he realized what his choices had cost. He stopped taking orders, stopped carving anything except what they needed. Their shoes, a box for Ellie's hair clips, a swing in the backyard. Money ran dry. Then the landlord came knocking. The rent was 3 months overdue, and Leo had no savings. He begged, promised double payment, offered to fix the entire house for free, but the man was firm. Business was business. The next week, they were evicted. Leo packed what little they had into a wheelbarrow, some blankets, a crate of tools, the carved cedar bed frame the girls had shared since birth, and wheeled them to a shed behind the church, where Father Martin allowed them to stay for a while. And that's when Leo did something he never told the girls about. He sent a letter to a distant cousin of his late wife, a woman named Margaret, who lived in the city, a retired school principal, stern but known to be fair. He asked for help, not for himself, but for his daughters. Margaret replied 2 weeks later with a single sentence. "Send them to me. I'll give them a future, but only them." Leo didn't sleep for days after reading that. He walked the garden, watched the girls play, and listened to their laughter echo against the church walls. They were 13 now, bright, capable, deserving of more than a broken man in a borrowed shed. The night he told them, Ellie refused. She screamed, "We don't need anyone else. Papa, we have you." But Nora saw something in her father's eyes, the exhaustion, the ache of trying to hold it all together. She gently took Ellie's hand and whispered, "Let's do it for him." Leo packed a small suitcase, stitched their names inside their jackets, and before dawn, they left. At the train station, as the whistle blew and steam rose, Leo pressed something into their hands, a small, flat wooden plaque, smooth to the touch. On one side, their names were engraved. On the other, "Love is carved in sacrifice." Then the train pulled away, and Leo stood alone, with sawdust in his beard, tears in his eyes, and the sound of his daughter's laughter already fading into memory. Margaret's home was everything Leo's workshop wasn't: cold, orderly, and polished. The walls were lined with books instead of wood shavings. The air smelled of lemon polish and rules. She wasn't unkind, but she was distant. Discipline over warmth, structure over sentiment. For the first time, the twins had real beds, hot meals, school uniforms are tailored to their size, and classes that challenged their minds instead of their patience. But something always felt off, like they'd stepped into someone else's life and were trying to wear it without ripping the seams. Nora adapted quickly. She poured herself into studies, fueled by the memory of her father sanding through the night. She told herself, "If I succeed, it won't be wasted." Every A was a thank you letter Leo never received. Every scholarship application, a whisper of, "I'm coming back." Ellie, though, was different. She rebelled, not with drugs or danger, but with dreams too big for their guardian's narrow hallway of expectations. She wanted to dance, to move freely, like the swing their father built behind the church. But Margaret disapproved. "Art doesn't feed you," she said flatly. "Your father knew that." Ellie didn't argue. She just stopped sharing. The twins stayed close. But slowly, something changed. Not love, never that. But distance crept in. Like ivy through brick, quiet, uninvited. Nora excelled. She won debates, led science fairs, and earned a place at a top university. Ellie took a different path. She applied to a performing arts school, got a job at a cafe to pay for her dance shoes, and moved out when she turned 18. They wrote to Leo often. At least, they tried, but letters came back unopened, marked "Return to Sender." No one knew where he had gone after the church shed was demolished for a parking space. The trail had gone cold. It was as if he'd vanished with the dust. Still, they kept the wooden plaque he gave them. Nora stored hers in a velvet box. Ellie carried hers in her bag like a talisman. Whenever life felt heavy, they'd run their fingers over the carved phrase, "Love is carved in sacrifice." It reminded them of the man with tired eyes and steady hands, of bedtime stories told beside a wood stove, of how he once fixed Ellie's favorite toy rabbit with nothing but fishing line and hope. Years passed. Nora became a biomedical engineer. Ellie opened a small dance studio in a shared warehouse space. Success came slowly, quietly, but it came. And yet, both carried an ache. Every award, every performance, every check is cashed. There was always one chair empty in the crowd. Then came the day everything changed. Nora had taken a sabbatical to teach at a local college near their childhood town. On a whim, she walked past where Leo's old workshop once stood. She expected nothing. Maybe an office building, maybe a deli, but what she found was a boarded-up shop. The sign, though faded, was still there. Leo's Woodworks, Est, 1981. And on the door, barely visible beneath years of grime, a name carved faintly by a hand she recognized as her own, once small and trembling. Ellie plus Nora were here. Her breath caught. She called Ellie, told her everything, and in that instant, without words, both sisters knew he hadn't left them. He had stayed somewhere, behind that locked door or in the shadows of memory. Their father had been waiting for them to come back. The train ride back felt both familiar and foreign. As the fields blurred past the window, Ellie tapped her fingers against the wooden plaque in her lap. Nora sat beside her, quiet, clutching a small leather bag that held more than clothes. It held hope, questions, maybe even guilt. Neither had been back in 20 years. They arrived on a gray morning. The station hadn't changed much. Same chip paint, same rusted benches. But time had certainly changed them. Two women now stepped onto that platform. Not the teenage girls who once left with tears and stitched jackets. Their first stop was the old workshop. It looked abandoned. Cracked windows, ivy curling through the wood panels, a door that groaned when they pushed it open. Dust danced in the light streaming through the holes in the roof. Broken furniture lay scattered like memories no one cleaned up. But beneath it all, something familiar lingered. The scent of sawdust. Ellie walked to the corner where their bunk once sat. Nora traced her fingers across the workbench. And there it was, the old oak table, the one Leo had carved his vow into. She knelt, cleared the grime, and read the words again. "I'll raise them with everything I have, and when I have nothing left, I'll give them love." Nora turned to her sister. "If he's still here, we have to find him." It took weeks. They asked around town. Some remembered Leo, the quiet man who fixed broken shelves for free. Others thought he'd died years ago. "Disappeared," said one grocer, like he was waiting for someone. But they never came. Then, one woman spoke up, an old neighbor, who had once shared tomatoes over the fence. "He's still alive," she whispered. "He lives on the edge of town, in the woods, built himself a new place, doesn't talk to anyone, but he never missed a birthday." Nora's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The woman shrugged. "Every year, on June 4th, He walked to the old train station, left two little carved birds on the bench, one with a red ribbon, one with blue. Ellie's knees nearly gave out. They followed the directions, down a dirt road, past a stream, to a clearing where birdsong softened the silence. And there it was, a cabin, built by hand, logs interlocked with care, smoke rising from the chimney, a chair on the porch, rocking slightly in the wind. He was thinner now, hair is fully gray, shoulders curved with time, but his eyes, those eyes, widened the moment he saw them. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He stepped forward, arms trembling, and both daughters fell into them like they were children again. Ellie wept into his chest. Nora clung to his shirt like she was afraid it would all disappear. "I thought I lost you," he finally whispered, voice cracking. "You never did," Nora said, pulling out the plaque. "You gave us everything." That night, they stayed in the cabin. Ellie cooked while Leo told stories they hadn't heard in years. Nora showed him pictures, graduations, performances, first apartments. They laughed, they cried, they remembered. And before bed, Ellie stepped outside, placed something gently on the windowsill. Two carved birds, one with a red ribbon, one with blue. The next morning, Leo awoke to hammering. He shuffled outside to find Ellie and Nora standing beside the old toolbox he thought he'd lost. They wore work gloves, hair tied back, eyes gleaming. "What are you doing?" he asked. Ellie smiled. "Finishing what you started." The days that followed were the kind of days Leo had only dreamed about in silence. His daughters, now women, moving through his cabin like they'd never left, filling it with chatter and laughter and the rhythm of life he'd buried long ago. For the first time in decades, his meals were shared, his silence broken not by loneliness, but by stories, plans, and love. But something was different this time. Every morning, Ellie would rise early and walk the perimeter of the land, sketching, measuring, tapping her pencil against the edge of her notebook. Nora spent hours sorting through the old tools, restoring what she could, cleaning each chisel and plane with reverence. Leo watched in curiosity, but they wouldn't say much, only smiles, only the phrase, "Trust us." Then one afternoon, they took him back to the old workshop, or rather, where the workshop used to be. Except now, there was something new. A wide, open structure had risen on the same soil. The bones of it were strong, beams of polished cedar, sunlight streaming through open skylights, and large wooden tables arranged neatly across the room. Leo stood there, stunned. "What is this?" Nora stepped forward, holding a small sign carved in maple wood. "The Leo Foundation, a school of craft, raised in love. We built this for you," Ellie said softly. "And for every child out there who feels like they have nothing, but might have hands like yours." Leo looked down at his own hands. They were shaking. "We used our savings," Nora continued. "My salary, Ellie's studio earnings, some grants, donations, a little bit of magic, maybe, but mostly the will to bring something full circle." The workshop wasn't just a workshop anymore. It was a school, a refuge, a dream. In the back was a quiet corner labeled the story table, where kids could carve their names, just like Ellie and Nora once had. Every chair was built from reclaimed wood. Every lesson began with one phrase etched above the entry: "Love is carved in sacrifice." Leo didn't speak for a long time. He just walked the space, touched the tools, ran his fingers over the smooth grain of every surface, and then he cried. Not the silent, private tears he'd held in for decades, but deep, shaking sobs, the kind that break something open and let the light in. His daughters held him, one on each side, like two roots returning to the same tree. Later that night, they sat around a fire outside the cabin. The stars above them blinked like old friends. Ellie reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Inside were two small wooden figures. One was a father. Two girls held onto each of his hands. "We carved it together," she said. Just like you taught us. Leo took it in his hands, speechless, his eyes, wet with memory, landed on the carved base, raised in sawdust, repaid in love. The wind shifted, pine needles rustled, somewhere in the trees. A woodpecker knocked against bark. Echoing like a hammer on oak, Leo smiled, whispered one word, and closed his eyes. Home. Sometimes, the most powerful promises aren't spoken aloud. They're carved in wood, in silence, in sacrifice. Leo never asked for anything in return. He built with what little he had. Because love doesn't wait for perfect conditions, it simply gives. And in the end, his daughters didn't just return home, they returned home, carving back into the world the same strength, kindness, and unshakable devotion they were raised with. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that love, true love, always finds its way back, then let this be your sign. Never underestimate what a quiet vow, made in sawdust and sorrow, can become when it's carried by those who were shaped in its dust. Thank you for watching. We tell stories like this to remind you that behind every old workshop, every scar, every forgotten man, there might be a vow just waiting to be fulfilled.